Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the FE and Skills Collective. It's great to see you all here. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm actually loving the venue as well. It feels like a really nice setting for us to have a really inclusive conversation. So I look forward to the day, and I don't so much look forward to writing up the report because that's going to come with a bit of a challenge, but one that we will rise to. I'm Vikki Smith, Exec Director of Education and Standards at the ETF. I'm in the privileged position of chairing the session entitled Opportunities, Localised Decision Making for a Stronger Skills System. And I'm thrilled to be here with such a distinguished panel to explore this topic. The panel's been chosen deliberately for the different lenses that they will bring to that particular question. So I hope that in turn that will actually stimulate quite a wide-ranging conversation once we've heard from the panellists. Before I introduce our panellists, just want to give a little bit of context. As we all know, the importance of localised decision-making within our sector is growing rapidly. Local communities are often best placed to understand the unique skills needs of their locale, and aligning educational opportunities with local industry demands means we can unlock new pathways for economic growth, but also for social mobility, which is critical for the further education and skills sector. In recent years, we've seen an increasing policy focus on devolution and localised strategies, particularly to address regional disparities in skills and employment. This shift towards local empowerment brings exciting opportunities for the FE and skills sector to become more agile, responsive and impactful in supporting the local economy and the communities therein. A key element of the discussion this morning is, I expect, but you may take it in this direction or other, is the collaboration between colleges, local businesses and community organisations. When these stakeholders work closely together, we can ensure that decision-making reflects the actual needs of learners and industries. A strong skills system must be built with input from all involved, especially educators who are at the front line and understand the needs of students and preparing them for the workforce of the future. So again, industry is coming into the mix there. Of course, the challenges, and we perhaps hear a lot about the challenges rather than the successes. I would hope that we can reflect on some of those successes, particularly in the afternoon session. We know there are resource disparities, maintaining consistency in standards, ensuring inclusivity. All of these can complicate decentralisation efforts. However, I would contend that the opportunities far outweigh these challenges, offering us a chance to build a more flexible, inclusive and future-ready skills system. With this context in mind, I'm delighted to introduce my panellists, each of whom, as I say, brings a wealth of experience and insight to the conversation. They will have their own take on this, but let me introduce Yusuf, Assistant Principal at Cardiff and Vale College. I have Sally, who is CEO at Milton Keynes College. We have Kate, who is Deputy CEO at Recruitment at the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, and Eddie Playfair, Senior Policy Manager at the Association of Colleges. I'll hand over to each of them for brief introductions, so please do kind of talk a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from, as well as kind of what this conversation means to you. Bring to the floor the opportunities and challenges that you see them from your unique perspective, and I think that will really open up the conversation because it will show us the multifaceted nature of the agenda, and also actually reflect the multifaceted nature of the sector that we are here talking about and looking to support. Once we've heard from all of the panellists, I will open the floor. So please note any questions as the panellists are speaking, and save them for once we've heard from each of them. I will come first to Yusuf, please. introduce yourself and for your opening comments on the subject.
Thank you very much indeed. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim, and I'm currently assistant principal at Cardiff Vale College, as Vikki has said. And I've been making my way west along the M4 corridor. I started off in London, then was in Bristol, and I'm in Cardiff. Hope to get to California, but we'll see. We'll see how that goes. I guess from my perspective, moving from the English system to the Welsh system was an interesting one. Wales is a devolved nation in terms of education, and therefore theoretically they have the tools and the ability to be able to look at a really local context and on a national level to really create an amazing ecosystem for skills. It hasn't quite happened yet, and so I think it's quite interesting to look at why that hasn't happened, and there are lots of lessons to learn in that. And so in terms of my take and what I'd like to look at is what are the fundamental challenges in the system which mean that we have been unable to progress, and to coin our Prime Minister's phrase on this, it's a broken system. And so that means that we need some sort of recognition of how we're going to align things to repair that. So what I'm really interested in is how can we get an authentic voice from the system? What does that mean? Who is the system? Who makes part of the system? And then what are the opportunities and who are the stakeholders and what roles do they play to be able to maximize those opportunities? Because the challenge that we have at the moment is we've got not just young people, but adults, parents, who've got skill and talent and ability to contribute to us being an advanced nation. And my final point on that would be, we really need to take advantage of the liberties we have in this nation, because we have so many liberties and so many advantages, but from a global context, there are many people catching up on us. And if we want to remain ahead of the curve and take advantage of our starting point, then we need to get to grips with some of these challenges that we have. And I think the big thing on that is going to be around the balance between competitiveness and complementary services. And I think there's a role for the commercial sector to play in that, but also from policy as well. Thank you.
Thank you, very much appreciated. I will come to Sally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Sally Alexander, I'm Chief Exec at Milton Keynes College, and I've worked in FE for many years, but I've been Chief Exec for less than 2 years. So actually I feel like I know a lot and I know absolutely nothing, and I'm still learning as every month goes by because it is so complex a sector. We're a college like many other colleges with, young people, adults, apprenticeships, professional qualifications, a lot of provision for learners with special needs, and actually such an increase in young people with the HCPs that we need to work on. It's a specific challenge for us, and I think it is across the sector. We also have a fantastic Institute of Technology in Milton Keynes, and that brings us kind of different opportunities, because Milton Keynes very much sees itself as ahead of the tech sector of driving tech, and we're trying to use that institute to be more than just a location to deliver qualifications, but actually to be a hub to try and drive research with some of the fantastic companies in Milton Keynes at the moment that are looking at AI and digital. And we also, of course, as anybody who knows me will know, we deliver a lot of provision in prisons, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. Milton Keynes is interesting. It's not devolved. It's a unitary authority. And since the demise of the LEPs, we are just a long way from being devolved. We will probably be bottom of the list because we have a very complex geography, and the politics with a small p is very interesting. So the different areas have really not worked out how they're going to work together. So our council is very much focusing on what can we do in Milton Keynes. But it's also quite exciting in Milton Keynes because we're very joined up. We are now, as I very happily go around telling everybody, we're all red. For me, it may be just as positive if we were all blue, but I'm relatively comfortable with being all red. We have a leader of the council who is Labour. We have a Labour majority in the council with no elections for 2 years, and we have 3 new enthusiastic Labour MPs. So actually the potential to harness that enthusiasm and that desire to achieve something is actually quite exciting, almost too exciting sometimes. We have to kind of calm them down and work out how we're going to direct things. But because we're not devolved and we don't have that framework, what I spend a lot of my time doing, I feel, is actually doing the relationship building and the bridge building and trying to help all of our different partners understand what FE is and about how if you want to grow, you need to invest in skills. And it's interestingly, Milton Keynes it's very evangelical and it is growing. I think it's the 6th fastest growing city in the UK. So we have a city plan already about how we're going to increase the size of the city by 2050. And in the plan, that means we have lots more schools, and that means we really invest in HE, and they've kind of forgotten that little bit in the middle. So you won't be surprised to know that we have reminded them that actually if they want to build houses and then they want to upskill all the new employers they want to bring to Milton Keynes, they need a comprehensive skills system to enable them to do that. And so we work with all sorts of partners. We work with the schools. We're a bit what I would call HE light in Milton Keynes, and so there's a real focus at the moment at trying to get an undergraduate university into the city. So at the moment, the nearest to it is the work that we do through the Institute of Technology. We work with the civic partners who I've mentioned. We, of course, work with employers. They're one of our biggest partners, both in terms of apprenticeships and work placements and those really big work placements we need for T-levels, but also seeing how they can work with us to develop the curriculum and then actually to start to sponsor us because, you know, we are cash poor, we need money, and actually we have some really big employers in Milton Keynes, Santander, Red Bull, and so a lot of my work is convincing them that they need to invest some of their lovely money with us, and they are starting to do that. And of course, as you mentioned, the work with our community, actually getting our community to understand us and for us to work with our community, that's immensely important to me because we can make such an impact there. So we're doing lots of things with these different partners to try and make a difference. We work with Silverstone Circuit, with all of our students going over there and developing their skills and going on and getting real jobs. We're developing green skills centres, which we've created with partner colleges through the LSTIP funding, but the curriculum has been developed with the employers in the area, and I am going to get sponsorship from one of our big employers just mentioned to help us take that forward. And we're working with Red Bull to try and encourage school children to really engage with the STEM agenda, and again, getting Red Bull to put their money into that. So the challenges are the challenges that we're all aware of. It's the funding. It's about trying to recruit and retain good staff, those staff with the technical skills. You know, if you've got an electrician, please, I'll take him from you, I'll take her from you. It's really difficult to recruit and retain, but actually one of my biggest challenges is how do I build my college? Where do I get my capital funding from now that we're back in the public sector? I need to build, I'm bulging up at the seams, and I haven't got an obvious mechanism to grow at the moment. So I'm going to our council and I'm going to our employers to help me with that, but that shouldn't be the way that it is. You know, if we're going to follow the government agenda of growth, the government should be investing in our buildings as well as in our staff. And the other big challenge for us is people understanding what we are, what is FE, and about how we are essential to the skills growth in this country. But for me, locally, the opportunities is that real sense of togetherness in Milton Keynes. Everybody wants to work together. We are one political colour, and I think things will happen. And I think just finally, I said I would come back to it, prisons. The college works in 30 prisons across England, and it's a real untapped talent source. We have historically worked closely with Timpsons and with James Timpson, and I'm watching daily what he's doing as a prisons minister. That for me is an interesting move, but actually trying to work with employers to understand actually there's real value in looking at what's going on in the prison system and how a majority of people coming out just want a good start, and that is just a fantastic opportunity. So again, really happy to talk about it. It's not necessarily a local result. The prisoners in HMP Birmingham, Winson Green, up the road, highly unlikely to be in a large scale being released here, but actually how we can look nationally with national employers to look at how we can use that untapped source of talent, for me is really interesting.
Sally, thank you. Lots for us to think about there for sure. Kate, I think you're going to add another dimension to kind of the challenges of this particular lens and localised decision making.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll talk a little bit about it from the perspective of my organisation is the Recruitment and Employment Confederation, so we're the membership body for the recruitment industry. And first, I'll just throw some numbers at you, perhaps to build on what Katerina was saying earlier. We did a study in 2015, all the way back then, where we looked at what was happening across the jobs market. We called it the Future of Jobs Report, as you do, and 2/3 of primary school children, by the time they leave full-time education, will be doing a job that didn't exist in 2015. So trying to predict where we're going is a really hard thing. When we look at all of our jobs data, which we've collected for at least the last 25 odd years, we looked at what the cost of the skills shortages were. So we tried to do some economic modelling just as we were coming out of the pandemic. And the best estimates we have is that if we don't start to address the shortages that we're seeing already in occupational areas, then it's going to be costing the economy upwards of £39 billion every year until 2029. So that's a really, like if Rachel Reeves wants to unlock some growth and investment opportunities, starting with skills isn't a bad shout. And then I could just read some more numbers. Sally, you've got some tough competition for those electricians. Yes. According to my stats, so we look at job vacancy postings, 10,223 job vacancy postings for electricians and electrical fitters last month. That's why you can't find one. 38,000 for nurses, 50,000 care workers, 15,000 odd finance and investment analysts and advisors, 1,500 hairdressers and barbers. That's a pretty low one. It's 1,603 FE teaching professionals last month were being recruited, just last month. 17,000 mechanical engineers and 35,606 programmers and software developers. And if I take that one, just knowing that number and just knowing about programmers isn't enough, is it? Because when I look at it and I see what recruiters are saying is really hard to recruit for, they talk about things that I don't actually understand at all. So they talk about CAD, and they talk about Java, and they talk about full-stack developers. I do not know what a full-stack developer is, because there's another one that didn't have full-stack. It had something very similar sounding. But the one I did understand, and the one that is absolutely desperate, is nobody can find cybersecurity professionals. And that makes complete sense, because all of these things track through, don't they? So as we were going into the pandemic, what happened is all of our shopping habits turned to online retail. So the need across the IT profession was for digital marketeers. But now there's all that data. So how do you keep that data secure? So the cybersecurity threat is huge, and that's where businesses need to focus. And the really big thing about cybersecurity is it's a global search. So we're not just looking in a UK market. People are competing internationally for those skills and for being the best and to be world leaders. So it's something where the skills agenda, yes, we can talk about it locally, but we can also need to think about it in that international context, because an awful lot of these things is how business is exploring it today. So I think there's two things the two sides of the coin. One is there's a load of labour market intelligence that exists. And knowing your local labour market is absolutely essential, because it will be fleet of foot and it will be fast moving. And there's no way that you can have FE programmes that are teaching the very latest IT engineering categories that are going to be relevant in 10 years' time. So it has to be something where it's that partnership and it's that iterative process where you keep coming back to it. And sometimes you may get employers that actually act as almost as if they're crushers of dreams. I know the chair of our organisation right now. She does huge. She runs an SME recruitment agency in Blackburn by Darwin, and she knows everybody in her local community. And she volunteers with the Youth Hub. And she was telling me about a conversation she was having with a young person, and they were saying about how they desperately wanted to be a graphic designer. And she's saying that's great. So the jobs they're all around the Manchester area. So either you move to Manchester or you commute, or you can go to London and the South East. That's a great idea. It's not possible. The buses aren't very good for me. Actual fact, don't have access to a car. But by the way, I have to look after mum and my younger siblings. That's not going to be, and the first stages of this person's career, the employers will want them on the site, nearby. So there's something there about what's the reality, what's the stepping stones that we need to build so that you move towards that. And it doesn't mean to say that dream is unattainable eventually, but it's just about what you're doing to get you into the workplace now so that you build up that experience. The other flip of that is I think there's a whole appetite for employers to be challenged and to do more. So I'm sitting here as that sort of more employer voice, a friend of FE, and I can see that we could do more, but it's really, really hard, and businesses are finding it quite tough right now. But if you're going to complain about skills, then you need to do something about it.
Okay, thank you. Some really good points in there that I'm sure we'll pick up in the latter half of this session. Eddie, over to you.
Hello. Do I press? Hello? Is that working? Hello. Yes.
Yeah, there we go.
Thanks very much. Yes. So I'm Eddie Playfair. I currently work at AOC, but my background is as a college principal for 16 years, and before that, senior leader in colleges and a school teacher before that. And we were reminiscing with Paul actually earlier about the kind of pre-incorporation world. And I mean, a lot of my time as a college leader has been spent, once you sort out various internal issues in your own college, trying to work to build collaborative structures and partnerships and confidence and trust and so on in areas where so many of the challenges that we faced in those areas, I've worked in Leicester, I worked in Tower Hamlets, I've worked in Newham, so many of the challenges that we faced, whether they were about employment or about progression or about opportunities, about inequalities, could only really be tackled collectively. And I love the branding, So but it's hard. It's really hard. It takes time. Not everyone's willing. People don't see the benefits. It's the opportunity cost of getting involved in collaborative structures. And hammering things out and discussing things is high, and if there's no incentive, if there's no real incentive for your own institution, what's the point? And it was very, very difficult. And just going back to the reminiscing bit, pre-incorporation wasn't perfect, but we did have the kind of wiring. We did have democratic structures which provided that framework for collaboration in education and even dialogue with employers. They were called local authorities at the time. We still have local authorities, but they had a big educational role. And I don't know if you know this, but in a previous life I was actually a chair of an education committee, so an elected councillor in a London borough, pre-incorporation. And we not only ran schools, primary schools, secondary schools, youth service, but also the college, the local college, the FE college. We signed off their budget. So yes, it was bureaucratic. Yes, it was probably heavy-handed, but you had the structures. And I think what the phase we're in now is having gone through this kind of big explosion of kind of competition, individual institutions competing with each other, the kind of market mentality, and we are now looking to recreate some of that wiring in a 21st century way. I mean, I'm not suggesting we go back to local authorities as they were in the 80s. But and I think the point about that is that what we were able to do in our clumsy way back in the 80s was put the agenda of developing the local area, whether it was a London borough or a county or Greater London or any other area, put the agenda of social justice, of greater equality, of investing in local people, of improving our community, put that in front of the system. And at the moment, we don't have that. So we're inventing it through LSIPs and fantastic to hear about Milton Keynes, those structures. But those structures have to be created, have to be invented, and it's really hard work. So I think just on that local collaboration, local partnership, whether it's educational, cultural, economic, all of that has to be reinvented, and it's hard work. So that's one point I want to make. The only other point I wanted to make is a point about what do we mean by a stronger skills system, because I think again, thinking back to the old days, you know, when you get to a certain age, you know, your reference points are quite, some of your reference points are quite distant. But we didn't talk about skill. You know, skills are real. Skills exist, clearly. And we hope that our students, when they come to a college, come out, will leave us with a higher level of skill and useful skills and appropriate skills and relevant skills than they had when they came in. So skills are real. But I think this kind of taking of skills out and putting them on a pedestal and saying, you know, here's this thing that we are delivering, and here's this thing called the labour market, which has needs, you know, vacancies and skills gaps and so on, and we can just deliver it here, and somehow there'll be a linear process of, you know, A to B. That's just not how it works, is it? I mean, we all know that. It's not how it works. And skills are not things. Skills are relations. Skills are social. Skills are learnt in a context. They're used in a context. They're developed in a context. And, of course, they have value in the marketplace. So, you know, the challenge of, you know, social care, very, very good example. Health and social care, we're desperate. We need to develop the health and social care workforce. But the pay levels, so part of the problem is not a skills gap or a skills shortage, but the pay levels in that sector are low, so it's not competitive in the labour market. And in a world where we're told that, you know, high-value courses, so-called, I mean, that's a term that is used, isn't it? High-value courses are the courses that lead to highly paid jobs. That linear relationship is very clear. You know, the course that's of value is the course that's going to get you a high-paid job. And if pay in health and social care is low, that's not a high-paid job. It's not a high-value course. Ipso facto, it's not, you know, it's not something that you should aspire to. So the problems in the skills system, if we're going to call it a skills system, are you know, completely interlinked with the problems in the labour market, the you know, economic problems, inequalities in the labour market, inequalities in society generally, and the value we put on things. And so we need to invest in. We need to have an industrial strategy. We need to have an employment strategy. We need to have a kind of social cohesion strategy, and then the skills piece will follow that. Will support that. Can support that. And colleges obviously are at the centre of this because we're in our communities, you know, looking at the challenges and the problems and the opportunities and the skills and the people that we have in our local patch. So we call ourselves anchor institutions, don't we? And that's very real. So there's some wiring or plumbing to be done, and collaboration to be incentivized. I think we need to incentivize partnership, collaboration, and invest. We need to invest in jobs, in economic strategies, and invest in our colleges, of course, because you need that infrastructure to be ready locally to rise to the needs. Thank you.
Eddie, thank you very much. I am going to open the floor to questions, so please do get your hands at the ready to shoot up. We've got roving mics that will come to you. Please, could I ask that you tell us who you are and where you are currently, who you are currently representing, and I will move us on. Before I do that, just to sort of give us a few pointers and sort of reflect on some of the things that we've heard from our panellists. We are looking at devolution. When you think about sort of localised economies from a Four Nations perspective, we are looking at localised decision making. We are looking at unitary authorities and decision making. So even sort of the notion of devolution is multifaceted here, and localised decision making has multiple layers that actually will give us different levels of permissions and authority, which can kind of I would say means again that we have complexity within the system, because there isn't one size that fits all, because actually we're dealing with things on different levels of scale, different levels of industry, because they are different up and down the country as well, because we have to be responsive to our local economies. As we heard from Kate, it's like, we know there are hotspots up and down the country for certain career choices, and what happens to individuals if they are interested in those industries, but they live, I was going to say 200 miles away, but actually 20 miles away can be a challenge as well. We are talking about colleges and education and skills providers being really lifeblood within those localities, and really being those anchor institutions. They have civic responsibility. They are looking at community. They are being tasked to work with employers and have that industry perspective. They're also asked to be futurologists, because as we heard again, the jobs of today didn't exist. We couldn't even conceive of them probably 5, never mind 25 years ago. And that pace of change is happening. So how on earth do we prepare our young people and make sure the courses that we have are inspirational for our young people, but also mean that the jobs are ready when they leave us as well? Because actually those high-paid jobs, high-value courses, the jobs may be quite scant if they're leading edge, because actually they haven't become wholly adopted yet. So yeah, we've got to think about the here and the now, the tomorrow, but also the future aspects. And there's something around very much at the moment, the changing policy landscape. We heard about new structures, but equally the ask for agility. And how do you do that when everything is moving so fast and we're running to keep up? So there's a lot for us to go at here. I do have some questions prepared if you're a little shy. I suspect that might not be the case. Excellent. We have our first question.
Kevin looked like he was going to throw me the mic, and I was getting ready to catch it. Ollie Newton from the Edge Foundation. Great introductions, thank you so much. I wanted to get down to kind of pinning down like how much decision making do we want locally. So we've got models for this. So in Northern Ireland, everything's become very centralised. 6 colleges within the department, maybe moving to 1 college. At the other end, maybe we want to be building a beautiful patchwork quilt and just accept that things are different in different areas. In the middle, there's the example from the Netherlands that we heard at a recent great AOC conference, where the kind of 70% is set nationally, 30% is given flexibility in the local area. Where do we want this to set the slider on that if we were kind of making a recommendation to ministers and policymakers?
Great question, thank you, Ollie. Anyone want to take that first, or shall I just work down the line?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I've grabbed another mic. Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but a model which is flexible enough to respond to regional and local needs, because regions and localities are different. They feel different, they look different in terms of employment opportunities. But there's also an entitlement, isn't there? There's a national entitlement, particularly for young people, but for everyone, to a good, broad-based education, to be introduced to the skills, the literacies that they need to live, to be citizens in a modern society, and that's an entitlement that is national. That's in terms of what we expect from the system. In terms of what the system looks like, I don't know if you were getting at that, Ollie, but the provider landscape. I think there's room for variety, there's room for diversity, but the key is the coherence of the system as experienced by learners, by employers. You need to understand how to relate to the system. So if the system is, 300 small to medium-sized providers in one area and, one big college group in another area, that's not necessarily a problem as long as it's coherent, as long as what's on offer is, first of all, delivering the entitlement, and relating well, cohering well with, the various stakeholders, whether it's employers, whether it's the wider society, and so on. So I think that having the wire, when I talked about wiring earlier, that's what I was talking about, is the system needs to be well designed to be responsive. And I mean, I'm slightly exaggerating when I say 300 different, small to medium-sized providers. But if they're all doing something slightly different, and they talk to each other and they work with each other, and students, potential students, understand how to navigate the system, there are systems in the world. I was thinking of Alberta, I think, actually, where actually, the providers actually are quite small, but they are part of a system. They cohere, and you probably need some system leadership in there as well. So I don't think it's a simple answer, but you need to acknowledge the different levels of accountability, and the democratic bit is important. I think the key to making sure that you're delivering on social justice and actually responding to your communities is through democracy. Now, for a lot of people that means it's bureaucratic and slow and blah blah blah. It doesn't have to be. We need modern versions of democratic processes, and I suppose that's what I was getting at by harking back to the old days.
Kate.
I was just going to say, why do businesses care about an industrial strategy? Because there's always this sort of sense of is what it's going to do is pick winners, but actually we do care. We want government to set that national picture where we pick some winners, because I said about it being a global marketplace for people, and definitely you want to have that sense of what is it as business that we want to be leading edge in the UK around. And yes, when you've got that industrial strategy, you've got that sense of, so hopefully, which sectors are going to be prioritised, where are they based, where is some of those hubs going to be, and then that gives us a much clearer picture of how do then those local responsive pieces act in that environment. So I think there's something where that's why government having a direction and saying something quite quickly is important. We all feel like we're from both sides of the picture, from both FE and from an employer perspective, is we're waiting for next week. We want to know. So I think that overarching piece really matters for us then to develop the frameworks that really matter. And then you can have some great examples which do adapt to the different circumstances. So I can sit in a meeting where recruiters can tell me all about, in minutiae, about life sciences around Cambridge, and it's fascinating what they're doing to come up with a cancer vaccine and what they need in terms of people to deliver that. But then the local institutions have to work about how do they do that, and that's FE and HE. So it's really important that you have that adaptability.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, if I can just say, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, I think the kind of picture that Eddie's put forward is really important, and actually is something that we're trying to work on. Some of the feedback we got, and I think this was common a lot across the country, when we did the LSIP, was about employers just not understanding the framework out there about, what do I apply for, what is a BTEC, what is a T-level, do I want that or do I want an apprenticeship? And that's a piece of work that we're doing to try and sort of simplify it, to have and we've got a group called COSEM, which is Colleges of South East Midlands, so that people can land on one page and see what all the colleges in the region are doing and be guided. But another sort of group of stakeholders that we're also trying to reach are parents, because actually parents understanding how to guide their students, and teachers in the primary schools trying to guide their students. And that's what actually employers have said to us, that they want to work with us to try and get into schools and actually say, this is the environment I come from. If you want to work with us, it's really exciting, and this is what you need to do. But what we need is more agility locally, I think. Maybe a 70-30 split is the right thing, but my ability to be able to say, actually, this is what we need to do, and an employer saying to me, this is what I want you to do, but me saying, I haven't got the funds for that. You'll have to do this qualification over here that's 3 years out of date, that doesn't suit your needs, because otherwise I can't fund it. That's the bit that, I would hope in the longer term devolution might bring to me. But at the moment, I'm stuck unless I've got a cash-rich employer who can say, yes, I'll fund whatever's there.
Yusuf, I think you have a unique perspective to bring here as well in terms of how it might be working in Wales, and kind of what the sort of degrees of flexibility might be.
Absolutely, and I think it's really interesting to reflect on. I love the analogy of the wiring potentially being removed, and we're currently in this derelict house, I feel, of us having to rebuild something with different architects giving us different views on things and having different stakes in it. From the Welsh context, there is that balance of the local decision making, but I'd be careful what I say in here, but Wales is of a certain scale, the 3 million people. And ultimately, the actual scale within that, then, when you look at the number of local authorities, there is a sentiment of there's a lot of plumbing in the system to deal with that size. And as an example, I was on a call with a university in India where they're looking at 150,000 students. And that's one university, one institution having to make a decision about the size of a population, which is on a scale the same sort of number of students that you have in the country of Wales. And so this is something that's of interest, is that where does scale come into this? And so what happens, I think, is that there are lots of paradoxes here. One is lots of expertise, lots of decision makers, but then how do you choose what to do? And if I was to categorize the journey of the last, say, 20, 25 years, removing from the local authorities, which, they did have the other challenges there, but at the same time, there were benefits. We've sort of gone to this wild west of people foraying around and figuring out themselves, how do you make a successful institution? And I always link things back to teaching. I think there are good ways to teach and there are bad ways to teach. There are good ways to lead, there are bad ways to lead. And going back to Ollie's point here, I think the sentiment really needs around thought leadership. Systems leadership is important, but what does a system saying? And I think we need to grow more thought leadership in the sense of how can you understand the nuances of your locality? How do you connect with the forgotten people in your locality? Like parents, for example, always forgotten. I say that your child a lot along there. And I think that this is critical because, and that's because in our narrative, in our mind, what we automatically do, I mean, most of us possibly have come from the traditional route of schools, went to sixth form, got a degree, and that's our default, that's our DNA, and it's very difficult to get out of that. So what does it mean to connect to our local community? How do we actually engage with that locality? And one of the things that has been underinvested in and has lost traction are community venues, community intelligence, community boards, and that's gone. So the social scene, the social youth scene is not there. And I think this presented a fundamental part of the DNA that's almost hidden even behind the wiring. That is critical because it's not formal democracy, but it is informal democracy. It's consensus. And without consensus, you're going to find it very difficult to attract that young person to get into the pipeline. The final thing I'll say on that as well in terms of local strategy, we've got a very linear view of how we measure progress. We need more STEM. Let's put on more STEM courses. Wrong answer. Because actually the people who are successful in STEM have had a broad experience of life. They've had a broad experience of skills, which we're having a skills strategy, great, but what are you actually going to want? Who's going to want to work up to a subject called skills? We're going to have skills studies today. Great. Is that going to work? But actually, how do you get skills to be tailored to a local community to meet the needs of those specific communities? And one of the things that, sorry, Gavin, I'm going to plug our article here. So one of the things that I wrote about in addressing how you fix a broken skill system are what I call eco-connectors. People who understand that specific ecosystem with the complexity of the partners and the stakeholders who are there, who understand that businesses and commercial businesses want to survive, and behind the scenes will be thinking about how can I make the most money. That's what they're there to do, as well as there will be the corporate social bit, who understand the challenges of having a HEI system, which is having some significant challenges operating in the same system as an FEI system, and the same challenges there within schools who are trying to provide that talent pipeline from the beginning. So I think a lot more attention needs to go into understanding these complexities to then have a consistent national approach of this is our vision, this is how we're going to lead well. And the final point I'll make on it is I refer back to John Nash a lot in terms of his game theory. And so the reason his game theory is so revolutionary is because he contended that a group of people who are playing for themselves will lose out to a group of people who play for themselves and the group. And I think that is the bit we need to understand, where how can we be competitive but complementary on a national level? Where do we need to invest? What do we need to invest in? And I think the last bit on that is, this is the final, but this is the final bit, is as a young person or as a parent, how can I be inspired to pursue a career that adds value to myself, but also to the group? And I think, again, in this Wild West over the last 25 years, we've become very individualist, and there's a lot to learn from being collective. Because it's all well and good me thinking about my rights, and that my rights are very important, but so are yours. And so how can I bring my best self and my skill set and my aspirations not only to advance my life, but to advance the life of others? And I think that sentiment is missing, and which is why there's such a disconnect between people and policy. Because people want to know that. They don't just want to know, how are you going to deal with my mental health? How are you going to deal with my well-being? They want to know, how are you going to deal with my collective mental health and my collective well-being? So I think these are some of the key things that we need to address in looking to have local decisions being made in a skills system.
Here. And thank you. And I think the sort of reminding us about that collectivity, and actually hence the title of the FE and Skills Collective, really resonates, and those applause also underscore that. I think we have a couple more questions.
Yeah, we've got
in the
two
audience.
questions. Chris, can I come back to you in just a tick? Because Susie was doing a lot of waving, so I want to...
Yes, of course. Hello, I'm Susie Branch-Haddo. I'm Vice Principal at BMET College, and I am Chair of Skills West Midlands and Warwickshire, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I couldn't agree more with what you're saying, Yusuf, about community centres. And when I unfortunately look at some of the headlines in Brum at the moment around the closure of, I think, about 16, I think, youth centres that's at risk, it really scares me. But it was just building really on what Yusuf was saying and what Sally was saying, and just wanted to share some of that collective thought that we're doing here in the West Midlands, is that, again, through local skills improvement plan funding, we've come together, we got exactly the same feedback. 75% of businesses don't understand FE and have never engaged in the last 5 years. And so we have come together as a collective of both colleges and providers under a single brand of Skills West Midlands and Warwickshire, which is what I'm now chairing. And we've obviously got a web portal that we're just developing that gives everybody that, I hate this word, that one-stop shop. But the bit that I found, and I'm sitting next to a couple of colleagues, the bit that I found really interesting since, and I keep saying, up until the end of March, we were in incubation, now we're in startup. The bit that I found really interesting that we've been doing is, and the shift in the dial for us has been all around that collective approach and that being competitive, but being collaborative at the same time. And a sort of a pure example of how we handled that recently was UK Construction Week last week. Big conference over at the NEC. Years after years, each college takes a stand. Obviously, employers, etc., go down, speak to various colleges, and we're all touting for each other's business, aren't we? This year, we scrapped all that, and we went under Skills West Midlands and Warwickshire, and we all took it in turns, and all of our brochures, yes, gave us the space to have our own voice for our own areas, but we cross-sold. And it's about, I think, and I can be prepared to be corrected, but I think what I've noticed is we've had to work really hard on it, but we've really what we really focused on right at the beginning was those sets of principles. How do we want to operate together for a better skills system for both our business community and our citizens? And therefore, at the heart of all that has to be trust between us all. And we've worked really, really hard at that. I'm not saying that we've nailed it by any stretch of imagination, because we're only in October. But it's quite an interesting model that we've been looking at. And in particular now, I think our next stage of growth is how we bring in more of the ITP voice into what we're trying to achieve. And so on Monday, for example, we're all together for a business-to-business conference that is all focused on disability and SEND. So we are running some awards and some best practice case studies to a room full of 100 people from the business community to ask them to engage better on supported internships. It's something we can do alone as colleges and providers. Put us all together and get us all working towards the same vision. Suddenly the dial starts shifting. And what's really interesting on our board is that we have the chamber around the table, we have the combined authority, and then because we have a bit of a strange funding system, we also have other LAs that aren't represented by the combined authority geography. And that's really huge, because that means we've got challenges that we can talk about and the next challenge I'm bringing to board is potentially get additional funding for. So it's quite an interesting model.
Susie, thank you for that. It's some really interesting examples. And particularly, I will major on, but I will come to the panel. Actually, the notion of trust and how we do work together and how important that is. And if we have that trust, we can then work within the whole landscape, the whole ecosystem. And actually that will allow us to then amplify the voice and the good work that we do, which takes us back to that understanding of the sector, because the more we can talk about the positive outcomes and the good works that we do, we can help people, whether it's employers, other players within the sector, whether it's parents, or even whether it's young people and learners themselves, so they can understand what the place is of the FE and the skills sector in sort of supporting individuals as well as communities and local economies, etc. So some really good pointers there. Who'd like to come in?
Could I just jump in?
Yeah.
That was a super long sort of question for people, but it's really, really good points. I think what I would lift out of that would be, how do we develop trust? How do we integrate? So how can we work both colleges, training providers, employer providers? How can we all work together? I think was probably what you're trying to say is what we're trying to deliver there. So if
Gavin,
that's helpful, because
yeah,
it's
absolutely,
condensing that down a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think this question of trust has puzzled me for a long time, because when you're trying to build relationships and collaboratives in a local patch, and I've spent a long... I have the scars from trying to do that in lots of different places. Trust is, I mean, we talk about trust, but of course it has to be enacted, doesn't it? I mean, it's developed through actually doing. You can say we trust each other, but until you actually get stuck in, roll your sleeves up, and actually do some projects and develop that trust, and it takes time and it's gradual. So I think there's the chain. It really starts off with incentivizing collaboration, and we don't yet have a system in our world that incentivizes collaboration enough, and makes the space for it, funds it, makes the space for it, allows trust to flourish. And also the other piece is the piece around innovation and criticality. So there needs to be enough resource in the system to allow some space to make mistakes, for things not to work, for people to be allowed to experiment and try things out that are a bit, maybe off the wall, but some of them will succeed, as business does. I mean, that's what businesses do, isn't it? And to try out something different, and to be very different, as in critical of the way we do things now. So I think all of those things have to be present, and I come back to the democratic piece. I know I'm like a bit of a stuck record on this, but I think the democratic piece is where you get that pressure from communities to say, we need a community centre, we need adult education, this is what it needs to look like, this is the gap in our community, this is what's going to change our lives. We need a youth service, there's youth disorder, there's youth crime, there's young people have nothing to do, we need a youth centre. That pressure has to be expressed in some way, has to be turned into something. And I'm sure lots of very well-intentioned institutions and employers and so on will say those things, will spot those things, but actually it's the people, it's the community itself that needs to be that needs to be that have a voice and have a stake and have a place at the table. But where things get bureaucratic and too institutionalized, there's a danger that you stifle innovation.
Yeah.
And criticality. So I think, and that's back to the balance that Ollie was talking about.
Absolutely. Thanks, Eddie. Lynn?
Yeah,
sorry.
That's okay.
Sally?
Just say, very much agree with what you're saying, and say we're very much in the early days of setting up a group of colleges working together, and we've kind of almost started at the other end and gone back to the coalface. So we kind of last year held across all the colleges skills competitions, which I know a lot of people do, but that was very new for us to do that. And that was great because that got the students understanding, working with students from different organisations, but the staff as well. And now we're kind of looking at, sharing approaches to curriculum development, and that's really been push through a number of us starting to really engage in sort of green skills development. And actually one of the colleges is far ahead of the others. So we're all working together in, well, I'm going to develop, solar panels, I'm going to do heat source pumps, and then I'll pick that up in next year. And it's just, and the staff like it. And actually we're coming back to our issues around staff recruitment and staff retention. And actually it's valuing them as professionals and actually them enjoying their job as opposed to the endless marking and the endless chasing up of attendance, and actually having time to work with colleagues professionally and develop their practice. That reminds them why they're doing what they're doing, and so it's valuable in so many ways if we're able to negotiate the trust issue.
Thank you, Sally, and I know that will have been music to Ben and Well Skills' ears. Yusuf.
Trust is critical. So, I'll go back to Michael Gove, God bless him. So taking ethics out of the curriculum in 2010 was very interesting. And because at the heart of it is trust. And I think at the heart of what we need to try and build up is an ethical framework. There's a out of fashion model. There's a model called the Singapore Leadership Grow model, and at the bottom of it, at the heart of it, is ethics, is making the right decision. What does the right decision look like in the context of your area, for your institution, which is a small community institution, college, but understanding the ecosystem? I was speaking with some colleagues from Welsh Government yesterday. I like to just throw provocative things out when I'm speaking to them because, they find it interesting because, they're in a bunch of boring meetings when they come to speak about provocative conversations. But just the notion, right, that we can conceivably have a 4-day week shows that we're incredibly inefficient with our time and what we do and how we then are, what we ask other people to do. And I think there's a lot of responsibility on us as leaders for the well-being of staff, for the well-being of communities, to think about, could we be more efficient? Could we be more effective in the time that's given? And I always come back to the classroom example of, do you actually remember all that stuff that you were taught, right? To what extent did that degree allow you to get onto the exact job that you thought? And this idea of the jobs not being there that in terms of what we conceived. If you go onto YouTube, there's a video called Shift Happens, and that was created 16 years ago. So what the heck have we been doing, right? Well, Michael Gove's been around. But, so I think there's a lot for us to do in terms of understanding what's within our control. But also trust is critical because mistrust is incredibly damaging. And I think one of the things that's been a challenge for us is, as a sector, we are very irresilient to policy. And what I mean by that is you get a change in minister who has obviously a lot of experience having moved from one sector to another and is going to then enact a bunch of change. And all of a sudden, we're running around trying to enact those changes. It's ridiculous. How can we build a system where we can make sure that still democratic, but actually there's a bit more resilience within that system to say, well, these are some interesting ideas, but actually we've got more wiring in the system to make sure that we're not going to make some fundamental, pulling off the carpets from people's feet, I think is important. And I think having trust is going to be critical, but at the heart of it then is, the point I'll get to is we're talking about ITT programs. The thing I was speaking about to Welsh Government, to get back to that is, shouldn't we have, as someone becomes a leader in a college or in a school or in a university, and if they're in a leadership position, shouldn't they be on a leadership program? Shouldn't that program be unified? Because when I started as a teacher, it's sort of like, oh yeah, you'll become a good teacher eventually. And I know that resonates a lot of people. We're not going to tell you exactly how to do it because there's a mystique. When you start as a leader, it's not too different. At some point, you might figure it out. And surely that's a failure on our leadership strategy in the nation and our teaching strategy in the nation. I think then we might be able to get some of these policies through in a bit more resilience and more trust.
Thank you. Kate. You've got another question. Okay, thank you for that. We do just have a couple of minutes left, but Gavin, if you'll indulge us, can we take one more question?
Thanks. So, morning panel. Chris Cherry, I currently represent myself, but like Ollie, have been part of the National Skills Strategy and Policy System and Architecture, so sorry for all that. I tried to protect you all from Matt Hancock, so if I can be thanked for that at least, that would be great. I've just got sort of a comment and a question. Sally, you talked about not having enough electricians, and if you had one, you'd bite their arm off, because clearly in Milton Keynes there is a need for electricians. Therefore, you're never going to get them, because if they're available, they'll be working in the sector, and they wouldn't see FE as an option unless it was really, really incentivised to do so. So that's a very difficult thing to break down, and something we struggle with. Certainly things like the Richard Review did that. Kate, you talked about 120 hairdressing jobs. When I joined the Learning Skills Council Exec Director in Manchester, the first day I arrived, there were 8 net jobs for hairdressing, and I was being asked to agree budgets for 1,200 places. And Barbara keeps telling me that people get free choice as well. It's not about you're in that job, therefore you're going to be a construction worker, and don't argue about it. And I get that as well. And Eddie, you talked about skills being sort of a gossamer that you can't really put your finger on and say this is a skills thing. And Yusuf, you talked about going to a skills day. Today we're doing skills. It's very difficult to do that. So there really isn't a skills system. It's a relationship system. So the question I wanted to kind of tie that together with is, wouldn't it be great, the day the cybersecurity recruitment day, that out popped all these wonderful teachers and lecturers in cybersecurity who've been anticipated 10 years beforehand to be ready to go? I'm assuming, Kate, that all the cybersecurity are all working for MI6 and you won't know about them anyway. So how do we get a system in a low trust, no money environment? I don't think either of those two things are going to change in the next parliament, because the last time the skills sector was broken was the last time there was a general election. It seems to be a kind of 5-year project management of the skills system by whichever minister thinks they know something about it. And I'm not being political about that. They're all like that. So how do we break that? And how do we anticipate those 2015 jobs that didn't exist, now they do, far enough ahead to be prepared? What systems are we going to need to do that? We tried regional development agencies, kind of worked. We tried LEPs, didn't work. We've got another skills system coming, Skills England, and first thing they're doing is recruiting trustees and board members, so that looks like another bureaucracy coming. How do we break that system? How do we, at least at the local level, anticipate far enough ahead? So I'm kind of asking Kate first from the employer side to sort of lead us off on that one. So thank you.
Thanks, you. Very big questions, and shame on me, but I'm going to ask you to be brief in response. We'll start with Kate.
No, so wouldn't it be lovely if we didn't think in 5-year parliamentary terms, because businesses don't. It's just that's not how any of us live our lives. So that would be really like a long term. And I think the phrase that I come back to within our world is around workforce planning. And if you don't know what a workforce plan is, and if you talk to many businesses and you say, who's doing that for you, then I think that might be the offer that FE makes, is actually let's help do some of this, because you can't predict what is going to happen necessarily, but you can at least have that pathway there. The one I'll use in particular is green skills. We looked at all the job vacancies that mention green or net zero, and the growth in them has been exponential. But then you look at the actual vacancies and what it's saying, and it might say in the vacancy that we want to, that we have a commitment to be net zero as a business. It's not a green job per se, but it's being misinterpreted as a green job. So there's things there about what are we doing to think about that overarching workforce plan across businesses, and how do we partner up on that?
Thank you, Kate. If I can go, Sally, Eddie, Yusuf. Thank you.
Okay. I appreciate the slight scepticism about what Skills England might bring to us. I'm not completely sure, but any kind of sense of a clear framework would be great. I think what we're able to do as an FE college is actually work particularly with young people to actually make them really resilient and to make them work ready. That is, again, is the other feedback we got through our LSIP, was about young people not being ready for the workplace. I think that's a lot of a hangover from COVID, but I think it's just a changing culture. Young people operate in a different way at the moment, and how we can work with them to get them ready for the workplace, whatever that workplace is going to be, I think is incredibly important. But also working, we can't sit independently in silos as FE colleges and say we know what the future is. We need employers to be working with us and to tell us their vision of the future, so that we can adapt our offer with them, have them involved in what our offer is going to be. So I think it's that engagement with that local ecosystem, so that we can be as reactive as we can be, but actually getting our young people in particular as resilient as possible, and actually saying to them, there won't probably be a job for life. You may not know what your job is, but if you've got these skills, you are going to be ready to go.
Thank you, Sally.
Yeah, I would echo Sally's point about what we're learning to call essential skills. I mean, people have called them soft skills. I don't like the phrase soft skills, but those skills that are that make people ready and resilient and adaptable and critical and committed, if you like, to work. Because I think if we go down the line of, as I said earlier, a linear relationship between the labour market and the training system, the skills system, you're on a hiding to nothing, because you can't have that linear relationship. What you need is a system which can say, you did a beauty therapy course at college because that's what really turned you on at 16. That's what you were really motivated by at 16, and it got you into education, kept you in education, and it helped you to develop a whole set of quite transferable skills as well as beauty therapy. But actually, the labour market you're going into, you're going to need to, you may find that you want to work in, wind turbines. The system needs to be flexible and adaptable to say, well, okay, we'll give you those extra bits you need to be a wind turbine technician, beauty therapy. You don't need to. You're not going to forget those skills, but actually, this is what you're going to need to get a good job. So I think that's about it's all the things we've been talking about: collective dialogue, adaptability, responsiveness, and really understanding the kind of ecology of skills, knowledge, society, employment, and how they interact.
Yeah, so I'll start talking about Ofsted because that's everyone's favourite topic. So I find it remarkable that Ofsted inspections, Estyn inspections in Wales, for about 25 years, say the same thing. You need to improve your questioning. You need to improve learners' ability to problem solve, and you need to improve their critical thinking. Exactly what we're talking about, the solutions to the problems that we have here. And it's because the relationship isn't linear. It's, employers don't know what they want, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way. It's because they know what they want for the next day, for maybe the next few days, but they're sort of saying to the educators, aren't you the educated lot? Aren't you supposed to figure out what the future is going to... And so you're left in this vicious cycle. And I think that the solution to that is trying to focus more on these transferable skills. And I think that there are a couple of cliff edges coming away, not to end on a sort of a note of doom and gloom, but quantum computing is going to completely revolutionize and cause an incredible amount of chaos in administrative data centers. Because with quantum computing, you put the data in, it will analyze it for you, and it will do the work for probably, if you're looking at a large FE institution, the 20, 30 people working on admin. What are they going to do in their jobs? That's the equivalent of the Fordium factory. And the same with all commercial sectors. So literally at the moment now, employers are thinking, how can I run my 100 million plus turnover business with 3 people, 4 people, 5 people? Because with the advent of technology, this is becoming possible. So are we going to be ahead of that curve to try and figure out where we're going to transfer people in terms of their new skills, or are we going to wait for that to happen? And I think this is the role of us in looking to, because we are collective. If we think about this in a way of developing transferable skills, developing people who can predict what might be happening next, then we're going to be in a much more resilient place than compared to people who are saying, oh, that's happened again. And so I think this is something for us that's going to be really important from a collective perspective. How do we increase our collective resilience, our adaptability, and our collective intelligence?
Thank you. Great question for us to end on. Apologies, Gavin, we've overrun.
Oh, no, you're fine for time, actually.
Okay. Good. I am not going to try and summarise the discussion. You've all heard it firsthand. I think that really has given us that situational sort of contextualisation that will set us up for the next session, which will take it to that national level. So I think it's just incumbent on me to say thank you to the panellists. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for your questions. Please, can I ask just for a round of applause, just to say thank you.